The suffocating tension in the living room finally shattered when a cruel voice echoed through our home. I am Quinn, a 28-year-old nurse working the night shift to build a peaceful life in Sacramento. Your daughter is just a nurse who barely makes anything yet. She leeches off my successful son. My husband's mother crossed her arms while flashing a deeply mocking smirk directly at my own mother. My husband stood right beside her with a furious glare directed at my mother, as if she had committed a terrible crime. The older woman remained completely silent for a few agonizing seconds before doing something that left both of them absolutely paralyzed with shock. Hello, dear listeners, welcome back to another original story on our channel where the hidden truth always comes to light. Please consider supporting our work by subscribing to the channel to hear more compelling real-life experiences. Before that explosive afternoon destroyed our family dynamic, my daily reality looked entirely different from the twisted lies they tried to paint. We were living in a spacious 3-bedroom house located within a quiet suburban neighborhood of California. My mother Clara legally owned this entire property because her name was the only one printed on the official deed. My husband Edgar worked as a highly paid engineer but squandered his substantial income on ridiculously expensive deep ocean fishing trips. He completely abandoned his financial responsibilities by forcing me to cover all the essential household bills with my modest nursing salary. That deeply unfair financial arrangement silently planted the bitter seeds for the massive disaster that would eventually tear our lives apart. Everything started going off track on a rainy evening 4 months ago when 3 large suitcases were dumped onto our living room floor. Nancy walked through the front door dripping wet, while dragging a leather travel bag behind her. She did not bother taking off her muddy shoes before stepping onto the hardwood surface. Edgar rushed to her side immediately to assist her by taking her heavy wet coat. She loudly announced that her husband Theodore had officially filed for divorce and forced her to vacate their premises. My husband did not even turn to look at me or ask for my opinion regarding this sudden residential change. He simply picked up her luggage while leading her directly toward the guest bedroom down the hall. He set the bags down next to the bed before turning to his mother with a reassuring nod. "Just stay here. Treat this as your home," Edgar declared confidently. I stood in the hallway gently holding my pregnant belly while processing his unilateral decision. My consecutive night shifts at the county hospital left me physically exhausted. I consciously chose not to initiate a loud verbal confrontation with them right at that moment. The domestic situation escalated rapidly by the time I finally woke up late the following morning. I walked into the kitchen to find the entire pantry completely rearranged. Nancy stood by the island counter inspecting the contents of our refrigerator with a deep frown. She systematically pulled out the sealed plastic containers holding my carefully prepared meals for the upcoming week and tossed them straight into the garbage bin. She stated those processed items were entirely unfit for human consumption. Before I could even pour myself a cup of morning coffee, she slid a long, handwritten list across the marble countertop. I picked up the paper to see several specific demands written in cursive ink. The detailed list included wild-caught Alaskan salmon, organic leafy greens, imported European olive oil alongside a highly specific luxury anti-aging night cream. She expected me to purchase all these expensive items before my next hospital shift began. She poured herself a glass of filtered water before leaning against the sink to closely inspect my worn-out medical scrubs. "A night shift nurse does not bring much financial value to a marriage anyway," Nancy remarked casually while maintaining direct eye contact. "You should be incredibly grateful that my son works hard enough as a successful engineer to provide this beautiful roof over your head. You get to enjoy the fruits of his labor while he exhausts himself every single day." I looked at the expensive grocery list in my hand without offering any defensive verbal rebuttal. Engaging in a shouting match with a woman who felt deeply entitled to another person's property would only waste my depleted energy. I folded the piece of paper neatly into my scrub pocket before grabbing my car keys from the wall hook. I drove straight to the upscale supermarket she specified to purchase every single item requested on her list. I handed the cashier our joint debit card to cover the unexpectedly high total grocery cost. The true extent of her financial manipulation revealed itself 3 days later when I logged into our shared banking portal to manage the monthly bills. I scrolled through the recent transaction history, hoping to calculate our upcoming utility payments accurately. Several unfamiliar high-ticket charges instantly caught my undivided attention as I scanned the page. The digital account showed a deduction for those organic groceries alongside a separate charge for the cosmetics from a department store. I kept scrolling further down the screen to discover a consistent pattern of unauthorized expenses. Nancy had clearly been using Edgar's card connected directly to our joint account to pay for premium hair salon appointments, restaurant lunches, and boutique clothing purchases throughout the entire week. My husband was actively funding her newly single lifestyle using the very money meant for our shared household expenses. I consciously decided not to confront either of them about the rapidly draining funds right away. I walked over to the kitchen counter to retrieve the lengthy grocery receipt from my purse. I pulled out my smartphone to photograph the printed paper document clearly under the bright kitchen light. I logged back into the banking application to download copies of the detailed transaction statements. I created a password-protected folder on my personal laptop to store every single piece of financial evidence securely. By May, Edgar was brought home with a severely swollen knee after an offshore fishing trip. His fishing companions practically carried him through the front entryway before carefully depositing him onto the living room sofa. A medical specialist evaluated the inflamed joint the following morning to confirm a completely torn ligament requiring immediate surgical intervention. The hospital billing department contacted us later that same afternoon regarding their strict insurance protocols. The financial coordinator explicitly stated we needed to submit a deductible payment of exactly $6,000 before they would officially schedule the operating room. Edgar leaned back against the couch cushions while grimacing and rubbing his injured leg. He confidently instructed me to log into our shared banking portal to transfer the required funds directly to the medical facility. He completely assumed our joint savings account held more than enough resources to cover this unexpected health crisis. I walked into the home office to access the digital banking platform on my personal laptop. I carefully navigated through the security authentication prompts to open our primary financial dashboard. The total available balance displayed on the glowing screen made me stop breathing for a brief second. The supposedly secure joint account held less than $200 in total available funds. I immediately generated a detailed transaction report for the past 3 months to locate the missing thousands. The generated spreadsheet revealed a continuous stream of extravagant retail charges authorized exclusively by the secondary debit card. Nancy had systematically swiped the plastic at luxury day spas, high-end clothing boutiques, and expensive seafood restaurants on a nearly daily basis. She completely drained the substantial emergency fund my husband and I had built together over several years of hard work. I connected the laptop to the wireless printer to produce a physical copy of the damning financial evidence. I gathered the warm sheets of paper before walking straight back into the living room, where Edgar and Nancy were watching a television program. I handed the printed bank statements directly into my husband's hands without uttering a single preliminary word. Edgar scanned the highlighted transaction lines while his facial expression rapidly shifted from physical discomfort to utter disbelief. He turned his head toward his mother sitting comfortably in the cushioned armchair across the room. He raised the stack of papers in the air while loudly demanding an explanation for the thousands of dollars spent at cosmetic clinics and designer stores. Nancy did not flinch or offer any sort of genuine apology for her incredibly reckless financial behavior. She simply crossed her legs while casually dismissing his perfectly valid concerns as trivial matters. She then pointed an accusatory finger directly at me while I stood quietly by the hallway doorway. "My son desperately needs money for his medical treatment right this instant," Nancy declared loudly to expertly shift the blame away from her own actions. "You are his wife, yet you just sit there hoarding your own personal savings for yourself while he suffers in pain." I did not raise my voice or react to her blatantly manipulative bait. I looked directly into her eyes with absolute clarity and unwavering resolve. My money was never the issue in this house, I stated coldly while stepping closer to the coffee table. The actual issue is who completely drained the family money to fund a lavish lifestyle. I explicitly refused to transfer a single cent from my private nursing income to fix a massive financial deficit she intentionally created. I picked up my cellular phone to call the hospital billing department back right in front of them. I professionally informed the coordinator that we could not process the $6,000 payment at this specific time. The medical administrative staff immediately postponed the ligament surgery indefinitely until the financial requirements were fully met. Edgar spent the next several weeks limping around the house in a heavy leg brace while relying entirely on over-the-counter pain medication. I took that specific opportunity to officially sever our remaining financial ties without any hesitation. I contacted the banking institution the very next morning to remove my name from the compromised joint account completely. I redirected my entire hospital paycheck into a newly secured individual account that neither my husband nor his mother could ever access. At 4 a.m. on a mid-July day, I pulled my coat tightly around myself while walking out of the hospital building before stopping completely in the staff parking lot. Theodore stood silently next to my sedan under the flickering amber light of the tall street lamp overhead. My former father-in-law did not offer any customary greetings or waste our limited time discussing vague conspiracy theories. He simply reached into his dark jacket pocket to retrieve a thick manila envelope before holding it out toward me. I accepted the heavy package without asking any immediate questions about his unexpected early morning arrival. The older man stepped back to give me enough physical space to examine the contents right there in the empty concrete lot. I opened the metal clasp to pull out a thick stack of official financial documents. The very first page was a certified credit card statement registered exclusively under Nancy's legal name. I traced my index finger down the detailed billing column to discover tens of thousands of dollars in accumulated revolving debt. The subsequent pages contained their finalized divorce settlement, highlighting her complete lack of personal liquid assets. Theodore handed over the tangible proof explaining exactly why he had legally evicted her from his private property several months prior. He remained absolutely quiet while I processed the undeniable reality of her disastrous financial situation. She was entirely bankrupt long before she moved her large suitcases into my suburban living room. The most disturbing pieces of evidence lay concealed at the very bottom of the thick paper stack. I pulled out several printed color photographs depicting a lengthy text message exchange between Nancy and my husband. I held the glossy papers much closer to the overhead light to read their digital conversation clearly. Nancy explicitly instructed Edgar to remain extremely patient until I finally gave birth to our upcoming child. She outlined a highly specific plan to exploit my inevitable postpartum physical exhaustion. She suggested they could easily convince me to surrender complete control over my private bank accounts by pretending to help manage the complex household duties. Their digital dialogue focused heavily on capturing my upcoming California paid family leave government deposits. Edgar had actually replied to her messages with clear agreement rather than defending his vulnerable pregnant wife. I read those specific text messages 3 consecutive times to ensure I fully comprehended their coordinated manipulation. My husband was actively conspiring with his mother to drain my remaining personal safety net while I recovered from a major medical event. Theodore watched my facial expression harden as the harsh reality of their scheme solidified in my mind. I do not know how far they plan to go, Theodore stated clearly while maintaining direct eye contact with me. But I know they are waiting for you to be at your weakest. He turned around to walk toward his own vehicle parked on the opposite side of the asphalt lot. He did not ask for the documents back or demand any specific action from me moving forward. He simply provided the necessary ammunition before driving away into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood alone in the chilling morning air, clutching the envelope tightly against my chest. I walked to the rear of my vehicle to unlock the spacious trunk compartment. I placed the manila folder inside the hidden spare tire compartment to ensure Edgar would never accidentally discover it during his daily routines. I slammed the trunk lid shut with a resounding metallic thud that echoed across the empty parking space. I finally understood that my marriage had systematically transformed into a deliberate financial trap designed to strip me of my resources. I unlocked the driver's side door to start the engine for my commute back to that increasingly hostile house. I refused to let them catch me off guard when my delivery date finally arrived next month. The piercing cry of my newborn daughter echoing through the Sacramento hospital delivery room in early August marked the immediate beginning of an incredibly suffocating period. Returning to our suburban house 48 hours later left me physically depleted from the grueling labor process and subsequent medical monitoring. My recovering body required significant rest while simultaneously providing continuous care for a fragile infant entirely around the clock. Edgar firmly planted himself on the living room sofa immediately upon our arrival from the medical facility without offering to carry the heavy infant car seat. He continuously rubbed his unoperated knee joint, while claiming the lingering physical pain completely prevented him from lifting the baby or preparing any infant formula. He effectively abandoned all paternal responsibilities by hiding behind the delayed ligament surgery to avoid assisting me with our newborn child during those critical first days. Nancy actively seized that exact moment of my extreme physical vulnerability to execute the financial scheme Theodore had previously warned me about. She walked softly into the nursery room later that afternoon, carrying a silver tray, holding a single glass of water and a blue ink pen. Her facial expression shifted into a highly practiced mask of maternal concern, while she gently patted my resting shoulder. She reached into her cardigan pocket to pull out a thick legal document boldly titled Power of Attorney, before placing it carefully on the nursing table. She spoke in a deceptively sweet tone, while suggesting I needed total bed rest to heal properly from the difficult childbirth experience. She explicitly requested my immediate signature on the stapled paperwork so she and Edgar could efficiently manage my incoming California paid family leave deposits on my behalf. Edgar limped into the doorway right at that specific moment to verbally support his mother by insisting they only wanted to alleviate my daily financial stress. I looked at the printed legal contract sitting beside the baby bottles without allowing my internal disgust to surface on my face. I instantly recognized the undeniable reality of the predatory text messages I had read in the hospital parking lot just a few weeks prior. I feigned overwhelming physical exhaustion by closing my eyes heavily and letting my head rest against the wooden back of the rocking chair. I whispered quietly that my vision was far too blurry to read any complex legal jargon at that particular moment in time. I promised them both I would review the provided paperwork after getting a few consecutive hours of uninterrupted sleep in the quiet room. Nancy looked visibly disappointed by the unexpected delay, but ultimately left the nursery room with her son limping closely behind her. The entire house fell completely silent around 2 o'clock in the morning, while my daughter slept peacefully in her wooden crib. I picked up the controversial power of attorney document to capture several clear photographs of every single printed page using my smartphone camera. I placed the paper back on the table exactly how Nancy had left it, to avoid raising any immediate suspicion regarding my awareness of their plan. I opened the secure banking application on my phone to initiate my pre-planned defensive financial strategy without making a single audible sound. I bypassed the compromised joint accounts entirely to officially open a brand new individual checking account with a completely different financial institution. I utilized the digital transfer system to systematically move my entire personal savings alongside the newly deposited state maternity funds directly into the highly secured private account. I carefully changed every single digital password associated with my personal identity while verifying the two-factor authentication protocols to ensure maximum security. I permanently locked the previous debit cards connected to my name to prevent any unauthorized retail transactions from occurring while I recovered. The bright screen illuminated the dark nursery room as I finally received the confirmation email for the authorized financial transfer protecting my hard-earned money. I watched my newborn daughter breathing softly in her crib while realizing this toxic environment would completely destroy her future if I remained passive. I opened a private web browser window to begin gathering contact information for several highly rated family law attorneys located throughout the Sacramento area. I meticulously copied their professional phone numbers and office addresses into a hidden digital notebook saved securely on my personal device. I spent the remainder of the early morning hours organizing the accumulated financial evidence into a comprehensive chronological file for my impending legal consultation. The loud chiming of the front doorbell unexpectedly shattered the heavily suffocated atmosphere inside our house during the late afternoon hours on my third postpartum Sunday. I carefully placed my sleeping daughter into her wooden bassinet before slowly making my way down the hallway toward the main entryway. My mother Clara stood patiently on the front porch, wearing a faded gray sweatshirt while carrying two massive cardboard boxes filled with newborn diapers. She possessed a consistently practical mindset, prioritizing functional comfort over flashy appearances whenever she visited her family members, bringing essential supplies instead of useless decorative gifts. Clara gently offered the heavy boxes forward, hoping someone would assist her with the bulky delivery meant for her new granddaughter. Nancy aggressively pushed past my shoulder before I could even reach the brass doorknob to welcome my mother inside the residence. My husband had previously saturated his mother with completely fabricated delusions regarding the actual legal ownership of this entire property. He systematically convinced Nancy she held ultimate authority over the household by repeatedly referring to the building as his personal financial achievement. Nancy genuinely perceived my mother as an impoverished nuisance intruding upon her newly claimed luxurious suburban territory. The older woman positioned her physical body directly in the center of the doorway to establish an impenetrable barrier against my mother. Nancy slapped the cardboard surface away with the back of her hand, causing one of the boxes to drop heavily onto the concrete porch. The plastic-wrapped packages of diapers spilled out across the welcome mat right at Nancy's expensive designer slippers, creating a messy obstacle on the front step. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest while flashing a deeply mocking smirk directly at the woman who actually owned the ground beneath their feet. Nancy took another step forward to invade my mother's personal space while raising her chin in a highly combative manner. "Your daughter is just a nurse who barely makes anything yet. She leeches off my successful son." Nancy practically shouted the vicious accusation into the quiet neighborhood street to maximize the public humiliation factor. She continued her aggressive verbal assault by insisting my mother possessed absolutely no right to step foot inside her beloved son's private sanctuary. Nancy forcefully commanded my mother to turn around immediately to take her cheap baby supplies back to wherever she originally came from. Edgar limped casually out of the living room, leaving his unfinished beverage on the coffee table to stand directly beside his mother during this entirely unprovoked hostile confrontation. He deliberately crossed his own arms in a mirrored posture while directing a furious glare toward my mother, as if she had committed a terrible crime. He did not utter a single word of defense for his wife, or attempt to de-escalate the wildly inappropriate situation unfolding on the front porch. He actively validated his mother's deeply flawed sense of superiority by presenting a united front against the woman who originally purchased this entire estate. Edgar smirked slightly while leaning his body weight onto his uninjured leg, clearly enjoying his perceived position of ultimate household dominance. I stood completely still in the hallway, observing the two of them operating under their shared massive financial hallucination. Every remaining shred of marital affection evaporated from my system while watching my husband actively support the verbal degradation of my own family. He prioritized maintaining his fictional wealthy persona over protecting the mother of his newborn child from completely baseless insults. I pressed my spine against the hallway wall, recognizing the absolute futility of attempting to reason with such deeply entrenched narcissism. Any vocal intervention on my part would simply provide them with the dramatic conflict they both clearly desired to validate their superiority. They wanted me to beg for their respect or cry uncontrollably about their harsh treatment toward my visiting mother. Denying them that specific satisfaction felt far more powerful than engaging in a useless screaming match on a Sunday afternoon. The marriage had already died a silent death during those lonely nights reviewing their manipulative text messages regarding my maternity funds. This public display of sheer arrogance merely finalized the emotional divorce process I had already initiated within my own mind. I watched Nancy continuously spew her toxic entitlement toward my mother without interrupting her increasingly loud theatrical performance. My mother remained perfectly composed on the welcome mat without showing any signs of intimidation or submission. The stark contrast between Nancy's chaotic hostility alongside Clara's absolute stillness created an incredibly tense physical standoff directly at the threshold of the residential building. They both remained entirely oblivious to the meticulously organized legal documents currently sitting inside a hidden digital folder on my personal computer. I simply waited patiently in the shadowy hallway for them to exhaust their aggressive vocabulary before the inevitable consequences of their monumental ignorance finally arrived to correct the situation. My mother did not display any visible signs of anger regarding the aggressive verbal assault happening directly in front of her. She slowly placed the heavy cardboard boxes onto the hallway console table before retrieving her cellular phone from her pocket. She dialed a familiar number to conduct an incredibly brief conversation consisting of only a few concise sentences, indicating an immediate request for professional legal assistance. A black sedan pulled into our driveway approximately 30 minutes after that specific phone call officially concluded. A professionally dressed attorney carrying a thick leather briefcase walked up the front steps to enter the increasingly tense residential atmosphere. Clara silently directed her legal representative toward the formal dining room, where everyone else had reluctantly gathered to witness the highly anticipated unfolding situation. The attorney placed his heavy briefcase onto the mahogany dining table before extracting a certified copy of the original property deed. He slid the official legal document across the polished wood surface directly toward my deeply confused husband standing near the window. The state-certified paperwork explicitly displayed Clara's name as the sole legal owner of the entire residential estate located in Sacramento. Edgar stared at the undeniable proof, realizing his long-held belief regarding his personal property ownership was nothing more than a complete delusion. He possessed absolutely no legal authority or financial equity within the walls of this specific suburban house, despite his previous arrogant claims. The lawyer patiently waited for the shocking realization to fully register on my husband's increasingly pale face before continuing his necessary professional duties. The legal representative formally clarified that Edgar, alongside his mother, were legally classified simply as temporary tenants at will under California housing regulations. Clara generously allowing them to reside within her private property did not magically transfer any ownership rights to either of them, regardless of their flawed marital assumptions. They were merely occupying the premises through her continuous goodwill, which had officially expired on this very afternoon due to their completely unacceptable behavior. The attorney spoke with absolute authority, leaving absolutely no room for any misinterpretation regarding their highly vulnerable residential status within my mother's home. Nancy opened her mouth to argue about her perceived rights, but the attorney immediately raised his hand to silence her incoming protest. He retrieved a meticulously drafted written demand to vacate before handing exact physical copies to both of the unauthorized residential occupants. He professionally explained they were required to vacate the premises entirely voluntarily within the legally mandated time frame outlined in the formal legal document. Refusing to comply with the written residential notice would force his legal firm to initiate formal eviction proceedings through the local civil court system. The legal representative further elaborated that California law required strict adherence to this formal written notification before forced physical removal could legally occur. He assured them an official eviction record would severely damage their future ability to secure any viable rental housing across the entire state for many years. The looming threat of facing an authorized court order, accompanied by local law enforcement officers during a formalized eviction process, finally silenced Nancy completely. She looked completely paralyzed while holding the eviction notice tightly in her hands, without saying a single word to anyone. I finally stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway to deliver the absolute final blow to their completely shattered reality. I dropped the thick manila envelope Theodore had previously given me directly onto the table, right beside the official property deed. I also placed the printed photographs showcasing the blank power of attorney document alongside their highly manipulative text messages discussing my postpartum vulnerability. I explicitly detailed exactly how I discovered their coordinated plot to steal my government maternity funds to finance her expensive plastic surgery desires, while I recovered from childbirth. I pointed directly at the printed messages, proving Edgar willingly participated in this massive betrayal against his own newborn daughter to appease his manipulative mother. The undeniable documentary evidence exposing their calculated financial theft lay completely bare for everyone in the dining room to carefully scrutinize. I watched their arrogant facial expressions crumble entirely as they finally realized their malicious financial scheme was completely dismantled forever, without any chance of recovery. Nancy's deeply arrogant gaze shattered completely into unrecognizable fragments, the exact moment she physically grasped the printed eviction notice in her trembling hands. There would be absolutely no miraculous interventions or dramatic reconciliations to save them from the impending consequences of their own malicious actions. The highly formalized legal process began unfolding with a cold, mechanical precision that completely ignored their sudden, desperate pleas for familial mercy. Edgar slumped heavily against the mahogany dining chair, while the catastrophic reality of his ruined existence systematically crushed his previous delusional confidence. He finally understood he possessed absolutely zero legal claim to the residential property, while his shared bank accounts remained entirely depleted by his mother's reckless spending. His severely injured knee still required an expensive surgical intervention he could no longer afford, while staring directly at his impending homelessness. The professional attorney seamlessly shifted his focus by retrieving a separate manila folder from his leather briefcase to place before me. He carefully presented the finalized divorce petition I had actively instructed his legal firm to prepare during those sleepless postpartum nights. I reached across the polished wooden table to grasp the provided metal pen before signing my legal name on the designated dotted lines without a single moment of hesitation. My signature officially initiated the permanent dissolution of a toxic marriage built entirely upon calculated financial exploitation alongside normalized emotional neglect. I pushed the signed legal documents back across the table toward the lawyer, finalizing my definitive exit from their deeply manipulative family dynamic. The legally mandated 30-day notice period expired, without any further significant interactions occurring within the increasingly hostile suburban household environment. Edgar eventually secured a remarkably cramped studio apartment located on the less desirable outskirts of the sprawling California metropolitan area. He struggled to navigate the narrow stairwells using his medical crutches, while carrying the massive burden of accumulating healthcare debts alongside court-ordered child support obligations. His once luxurious lifestyle, funded exclusively by my nursing income, evaporated completely, leaving him isolated with the disastrous results of his own profound arrogance. He lived entirely paycheck to paycheck while attempting to manage the severe physical limitations caused by his untreated ligament damage. The most poetic resolution materialized on the specific morning designated for their mandatory departure from my mother's officially protected private property. A uniformed local sheriff deputy arrived promptly at the residential address to oversee the legal eviction protocol, preventing any last-minute theatrical disruptions. Nancy spent several humiliating hours cramming her designer clothing collections into the exact same oversized luggage she brought when she first invaded our peaceful sanctuary. Her previously intimidating demeanor vanished completely beneath the watchful gaze of the armed law enforcement officer standing silently in the main hallway. She struggled immensely to drag her excessively heavy suitcases across the pristine hardwood floors she once falsely claimed as her own personal kingdom. She did not bother looking up to meet my eyes while I stood quietly beside my mother observing the forced residential evacuation. The older woman navigated her luggage toward the open front door before stepping awkwardly over the concrete threshold into the bright afternoon sunlight. She dragged her belongings slowly down the paved suburban driveway to load them into the waiting taxicab destined for a remarkably cheap roadside motel. The profound irony surrounding her permanent departure crystallized beautifully in my mind as the commercial vehicle finally disappeared around the neighborhood corner. The extremely arrogant individual, who aggressively declared my mother unworthy of stepping onto this property, was ultimately the one banished from the premises forever. She was legally expelled from the exact same house under strict police supervision, while my mother comfortably remained inside her legally owned residence. I gently closed the heavy front door, securing the brass deadbolt to finalize the permanent exclusion of their toxic presence from my daughter's life. The suffocating tension previously dominating the residential atmosphere lifted instantly, leaving behind a profoundly peaceful environment suitable for raising a newborn child. Clara walked into the kitchen to prepare a warm cup of herbal tea, while I returned to the quiet nursery to hold my sleeping baby. We successfully reclaimed our rightful sanctuary to build a significantly healthier future completely free from the relentless financial parasitism that nearly destroyed my independence.